Algo learners, welcome back. Today we are going to cover the different types of bias in backtesting. I promised last time that we would go into this as we've gone through our introductory sessions with regards to forming different algorithms for different purposes, whether it's the relative strength index or the Bollinger Bands or just simple moving averages. We really haven't spent much time on the backtesting results of those. And one of the main reasons why I purposefully ignored it for the most part is that we really can't take those backtests seriously until we really understand the different types of biases that are out there. And quite frankly, we want to be able to make prudent decisions about whether to take a certain algorithm live or not. And before we do that, we need to make sure that we minimize these biases as best as possible on the backtest so we could make better decisions as far as whether to go live on certain algorithms. The 5 different backtesting obstacles, the most common ones that we see, are survivorship bias, optimization bias, lookahead bias, time period bias, and then spread and slippage. Survivorship bias, something that I'm sure you've already noticed during the previous sessions, is that we are using the current membership index, if you will, for the S&P 500. And so the bias that I'm introducing is survivorship bias, because I'm using the current surviving index members, at this point in time. And so if I were to go back and run our algorithm and backtest it back to 2008, which we've done in several of the sessions, you'll see that in one of the sessions that we looked at the moving average, the 200-day moving average, to find out how many of the stocks in the S&P 500 are over their 200 moving day average. Well, when we went back to 2008 to take a look at that, and we used the current index members, well, only around 270 of those stocks showed up in 2008 in our results. And so we're leaving out around 230 stocks. Those are the stocks that didn't survive, for whatever reasons. Maybe it was market cap, the list goes on. But the fact of the matter is when I use the current index and start to backtest with those current members back in, say, 2008, 2009, I'm really missing the boat, because I'm using survivors. I'm only using the 270 some odd stocks that survived. And that really skews the results, because sometimes these survivors, they're survivors for a reason, because they're better performers. And if you have a algorithm that's structured for these better performers, then you're going to inflate your results on the backtest. So ideally, if you were to test your algorithm back in 2008, not only would you test it with the survivors, the 270 some odd survivors, but you'd also put in there the 230 stocks that weren't survivors, but they were survivors at the time, and they were part of the index at the time. And so if you were to be live trading your algorithm back then, they would be part of that live trading environment. And so it's very important for us to understand that. And in the GitHub page, I've now made an attempt to put together a list of tickers that is as best I can to minimize survivorship bias. And it comes out to be around 725 tickers. And that would give us close to our 500 names in 2008 and going forward. And so that will help us minimize some of our survivorship bias issues by using that ticker list instead of the original one that I provided you. So another interesting example on survivorship bias is this World War II aircraft diagram. in World War II, when the aircraft were coming back to base, they made notes on where the bullet holes were in those aircraft. And so over time, they created a diagram that looks like this, where they could tell where all the damage was. And it was proposed that they would reinforce and put more armor where the red holes were in majority, and actually reinforce those areas where the red dots are. A gentleman named Abraham Wald, a statistician, came into the picture, and he basically said that the way that they were analyzing it was wrong, and that all they were doing were analyzing the aircraft that were returning to base, the survivors, and that the bullet holes actually proved that the aircraft could actually sustain damage to those areas and survive and return to base. And so what he was more interested in were the aircraft that didn't survive, that didn't return to base, that he didn't have access to, but he surmised that the blank areas on this aircraft, particularly the engines, were probably where they needed to reinforce, because if a plane sustained damage anywhere in the engines, then there was probably a high likelihood that the aircraft was not returning back to base. And so it was decided that, based off of that analysis, that instead of reinforcing all of the areas with the red dots, that they were actually going to reinforce the engines. And that led to better survivorship rates. Anyhow, I just wanted to throw that example out there. There's a Wikipedia page that goes over it in a little bit more detail, but I wanted to at least use that as an additional example. Optimization bias. And so you might have heard this as curve fitting or overfitting. And so basically it's adapting or introducing additional trading parameters until the strategy is too close to the historical data, which includes both noise and signals, making it ineffective in the future. I've been guilty of this, definitely. And I have on one session in particular where I started manipulating some of the algorithm. In other words, I was trying to fit some of the parameters of the algorithm to the data set to achieve a better annual rate of return. And so that to a degree is okay, but when you're really adding different parameters and you're tweaking them and you're adding some more on top of that, tweaking them again, just to try to get better Sharpe ratios, annual average returns, lower drawdowns, what ends up happening is that you're getting less away from just the signals that make it effective. You're also including some noise, quite a bit of noise, in the analysis. And so when you go into the future, if that noise isn't there or that noise changes, that really throws off your algorithm. And many people scratch their head and say, wow, it looks so great on the back test, but going forward, in the future, when I started live trading it, it didn't work really well. And a big reason for that is overfitting or curve fitting. And so what we would do is we just got to go back to the basics, just decrease the number of parameters and increase the quantity of the data points. And that tends to help an overfitting situation. And there's a diagram basically that shows us what an underfitted situation looks like. So you can see the actual data points of values and time, and then that that line is basically our algorithm, and you could see that it's just not fitted to the actual results. And then you see The middle, which is a really good fit, which probably goes hand in hand with the signals, but it's leaving out some of the noise. And so that would be a very good fit over time. And then you could see an overfitted on the far right where, it's our algorithm pretty much matches every point and goes from point to point, up and down perfectly with each data point. And in there is a lot of noise, not just the signals. And so there's a lot of reading that you can do on underfitting and overfitting in machine learning and how to deal with it. But definitely optimization bias is something that, we don't want to be guilty of. We don't want to be tweaking and just going to the, doing quick back tests just to see if we can tweak and bump those results up higher and higher by making further tweaks and adding more and more parameters to get it to fit better and to get better results on the back test. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about look-ahead bias. This is a pretty easy bias to fall into. There's lots of look-ahead traps that are inadvertently in the code and backtesting, and that that's something that you can learn to overcome. But what happens is typically when data is mistakenly accessed at a point in the simulation when it would not have been available during actual live trading. In other words, the data actually gets ahead of the algorithm when and you really want the algorithm to process data when it would actually have access to that data, and not before it has access to that data. Okay, it's after it has access to that data. And so you see that I'm auditing continually. I'm kind of printing out data frames, just to confirm, pricing, that we're pulling the right enough, the actual prices that, we're trying to look for, certain, number of days of pricing. I'm pulling, series, arrays, printing them all out in the log window, and just trying to understand at which point in the algorithm, are we getting the data, and is the data actually getting ahead of the algorithm at any point? So that's what I'm doing a lot, and trying to audit the algorithm during the backtest phase. A quick example, and so we have a backtest timeline here. We have a day 5 market close. We have a tick for that. Then we have the overnight period, and then we have day 6 market open, a tick for that, and then we have our market activity, and then we close the market day 6 on the last tick in the timeline. And so I've just put a quick and simple code here to generate a 5-day simple moving average, and we're pulling the price data right after the market opens on day 6, and we're actually pulling the closing price for the last 5 periods, and the frequency is daily. And so we're pulling this after the market is open on day 6. So one of the first data points that it's going to pull is day 6 market close. And you say, well, how can that be? Well, in the back test, the data is already there. And so it's very simple for the algorithm to just go get it and pull it. And it will do that. And in this case, we're actually going to be pulling the day 6 market close, the day 5 market close, the day 4 market close, day 3 market close, and day 2 market close. And that's going to be our 5 data points in the series for PX. Then we're going to take the mean of that, and then that will give us our 5-day moving average. The danger in that is if we then get the current price at that same point in time, and then we use the 5-day moving average as basically our signal. So if our current price is above our 5-day moving average and we want to go long in that position, now we've made a decision based off of a 5-day moving average, which has in it a data point that's really in the future that we wouldn't have had access to during live trading. And so at that point, the data kind of got ahead of the algorithm. It didn't kind of, it did. It got ahead of the algorithm and it tainted our 5-day moving average. And that's look ahead bias. Okay, so lots of different ways to solve for that. But that's something that you really need to be aware of. Time period bias. Definitely a big issue. Definitely, I've seen it where we could cherry pick a certain time period to inflate our backtest results to kind of give ourselves a pat on the back and look how good this algorithm does. Selecting a limited time period, basically that fails to subject our strategy to various market conditions and events such as bull, bear, range bound, bubbles, conflicts, and crisis. What we really need to do, we need to focus on increasing the time period to include multiple market conditions, both good and bad. So here's a time period bias example. Both use the same exact algorithm. We're using blue shift on the back test, very quick run on the back test for each. The only thing that's different is the start date. And so in this particular algorithm, it really favors a down market. And so if I really wanted a really good spot to start, if I really wanted to cherry pick a great starting point for this algorithm, I would do it right at the start of the Great Recession, knowing that it will give a massive jump start for this algorithm. And so here's a situation where I'm actually including a market condition, i.e. the Great Recession, but I'm really cherry picking because here's the example on the left. You could see I'm starting August 1st, 2008, and I'm ending March 30th of 2021. So you can kind of see the returns 300+%, sharp at 1.14 and a maximum drawdown of negative 27%. But if I move forward and if I move to a point where I'm excluding the Great Recession, so it's not necessarily the greatest point to start this algorithm, this algorithm that really is likes a down market. So if I start at that point and exclude the Great Recession, well, you could see it doesn't beat the benchmark over time. And so big difference in returns, big difference in sharp. Of course, the drawdown didn't change, but definitely a big difference in alpha sharp and in the returns. So that's just an example of excluding a time period. And I know I said that you want to include all the time periods, and I think it's good, if I had included the Great Recession, but maybe not cherry picking the time to start with the Great Recession. I think that we need to account for these outlying standard deviation events, most definitely. And it's great that we have data that we can backtest through events like the Great Recession, like the pandemic, and so forth. So let's conclude by looking at spread and slippage. Not really a bias at all, but definitely want to go over this. You have volatility and liquidity that vary stock by stock. So if you look at all of the members of the S&P 500, they all have different volatility and liquidity numbers. Some have and most have a lot of liquidity, definitely because they're part of the S&P 500. But they nevertheless they do vary quite a bit. And their spread widens or narrows abruptly. That's another thing, is that as in live trading, we never really know when the spread's going to be widening or narrowing, but it does happen, and it can happen abruptly. Very difficult to model. And in the back testing, there are times where stocks have their spread widening and narrowing, and we're not necessarily taking that into consideration in the back test. And why? Well, bid-ask data isn't usually given in the back test, right? The spread is the bid and the ask. And so, the bid is what you would be looking to sell your stock for, and the ask price is what you're looking to buy your stock for. So anyway, one thing that we look at, a little bit controversial, but you can assume that the backtest value of a historical price, what they quote for the open, the high, the low, the close, is the midpoint between the bid and the ask spread. It's one assumption that you could use. But nevertheless, what we want to do is we want to build a slippage model into our code. And one of the ways to do that is when you run your algo live, say in the paper trade, and maybe you do that for over a 2-week period, and you make note of all of the purchases and sale prices that were made during your live paper trade, okay? And then you go back and you back test the same exact algorithm for the same exact period. And as you do that back test, it should have the same purchases and sales, the same stock purchases and the same stock sales as what you did when you did your live paper trade. If you don't, there's something wrong. But it should be the same exact stock purchases and stock sales. But you want to make note of the prices of all of those purchases and sales, and you want to compare the two sets of data. One from the live paper trade and one from the back test. And so as you compare the purchase and sale prices from each of the two sets, you can actually see the differences in what the back test has and what the live trade has. And you can get a feel for what slippage really is and how much it is in your algorithm. And another view that I think you might find helpful is this this spread, this slippage, if you will, and spread analysis. And so what we have here is a level 2 market quote of SPY ETF at some point in time. Now, a level 1 quote is probably what most people are used to seeing. It just shows the highest bid and the lowest ask. And so if you just go to the very top of this chart, and you could see the bid at $151.07, that is the highest bid. And then the ask, the lowest ask, is $151.08. And so that's typically what you would see on a level 1 quote. And that has a penny spread, right? So that's what you'll typically see. But if you drill deeper into the level 2 market quote, well, what is that? Well, that goes one step further. It shows the real-time quote for each market maker that's out there. And it shows what they're willing to purchase, what they're willing to sell at certain prices, right? So it's very helpful. But it's really something that, as over time, the reality is, and by the way, just to help you read this, when it says size, say on the bid, you can see the size at the very top is 2. That's 200 shares. The one underneath that would be 100 shares. The next one at 05, that would be 3,800 shares. And then 04, 5,200 shares. So you can kind of see if you were going to sell your stock to somebody, that's what they're looking for, what they can use, the sizes that they're looking to purchase at those particular prices, okay? So on the ask side, you could see, at 08, there's 3,900 shares that if you're willing to buy, at the market, 3,800 or 3,900 shares, you'll be able to get your pricing at 151.08. All right, but if you wanted to buy more, well, then you're going to have to go to, one notch lower. And so, I'll give you a good example here and kind of show, how slippage will actually work. Let's say we wanted to sell 1,000 shares of SPY at the market at this point in time. So we're going to the market right at this point in time, and we want to sell 1,000 shares. So we know we've got 300 shares, all right, that we can sell at 07. Okay, so someone's going to buy 300 shares from us at 07. But then the next 700 shares are going to be made at 05. So there's 3,800 shares in that 05 space. We're gonna sell, ours. We're gonna take up 700 of that 3,800. So what ends up happening is that on average, so because 700 shares we sold at 151.05 and 300 we sold at 151.07, the average execution that we're going to come out with is 151.056. And so it's actually closer to that 151.05, right? So it's 151.056 is our average execution price. And so if we look at that average and we subtract that from the, that level one quote of 151.07, that's basically almost a penny and a half. It's 0.014. And so that's slippage. That right there is an example of slippage. Is it a deal killer? Well, no, not really. It's 1,000 shares. Take the 1,000 shares times 0.014. That's $14, right? So that's very small percentage wise. But that's just for SPY. And so if things become a little less liquid and what have you, then maybe our slippage becomes a little bit more. Or if I wanted to sell a lot more shares, then it could definitely be more slippage, particularly on the buy side. You could see here, if you wanted to sell, if you wanted to buy 20,000 shares, well, you're going to be going down that list pretty quick, and you're going to slip quite a bit. So anyway, that's something we could look at modeling. There's built-in slippage models into the code. So Zipline has a kind of a built-in slippage model that we can base around spread. And so, and then sometimes there's volume that we could combine with spread and be able to, build a slippage model using a combination of volume and spread. So anyway, that's something we can look at building in and getting a little bit more robust with. But again, that's market pricing. And so if we just want to solve for it, we could always just do a limit order, right? So a limit order, if we say, hey, look, I want to sell these shares at 107, or I want to get 108, 151.08, and then until there's enough shares to be able to execute at 151.08, you're not going to sell. All right. Now you could miss out, but you're going to get your price and you're not going to get slipped. So, that's the benefit of the limit order versus the market order. So those again are the 4 different biases plus spread and slippage that we'll take a look at going forward in a lot more detail as we build out our future algorithms. But anyway, if you did enjoy this session and want to hear more sessions like this and others, please hit that subscribe button. And remember, you got this.